everyone, and welcome back to the Social Work Bubble podcast. This is Laura, your host. I'm joined today by Luccas. He's been on the podcast a while ago. Podcast vet.
Yeah, I can't remember. I don't even remember how long ago.
I'm not even sure either. I feel like
I know we were trying to set this up like 4 months ago to be on the second time. So
yeah,
it's probably been a while.
it has been, but we're here now. So
yay!
Exciting.
Happy to be back on.
Yeah. Today we'll kind of be diving into talking about depression. I know it's my understanding that both Luccas and I struggle with depression, and we're gonna kind of dive into how mental health affects social workers, how that impacts like how we show up in this field, and kind of what we need as support. So do you want to get started and share a little bit about your experience?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I have probably struggled with depression since, a kid. I can remember probably since about 8. But I think, with depression and some anxiety that come up, it's kind of bounced around throughout my life, as well as developing an eating disorder throughout that, which was undiagnosed for a period of time because of me being a dude and not having as much research out there as there should be. So I would say kind of starting from recently, and I think this is why we kind of changed around what we're going to talk about today, just because I really related to, following your Instagram story and whatnot. So recently, had a lot on my plate. I think I talked about that in the other podcast, being a dad of 3, preparing a wedding, and then I was doing a field placement, and then I'm finishing my MSW. So doing all of these things, I started to really struggle in regards to letting some things creep back in. And I think when we're so involved in our work in doing mental health, a lot of us get really intertwined with our clients, and we genuinely care. And I work at a county public level with people in crisis, doing stabilization work. So a lot of my folks are low income or struggle with a severe persistent mental illness. So I had some very difficult cases at the time, and this was a few months ago in late June, and was struggling a bit, and things just became overwhelming, and you don't realize it when you're in the hustle and bustle, right? So you're doing what you need to do. You serve your clients. You put 100% into it, or you're thinking you're putting 100%.
Right. Very true.
When you're also spreading yourself thin, when you're trying to put yourself 100% everywhere else. Some irritability started there, and then kind of like my anxiety, depression, my eating disorder kind of crept back in, where it was really easy, I skipped lunch, or I'm too busy, grab something on the go, or I'm not going to do this. And then a lot of those thoughts start to creep back in, and you don't even realize that you're doing them. So I really finally just cracked, where I knew I wasn't taking care of myself. I knew some of these eating disorder thoughts were very prevalent, and kind of going into some previous compulsions or behaviors, which very much added to my stress level, depression, and anxiety. So then one day I just had a complete mental breakdown, where it was no, I can't do this anymore. I had a client that was a very heavy case that had a lot of hands in it, as far as they were in a prison release program. They were needing family care. They had a lot of barriers in front of them. So
Right.
also addiction. So that created a lot of barriers.
Mhm.
And it ended up, I put in like all of the work I could do. And the client ultimately, I wouldn't say failed, but regressed to the point where they were reincarcerated.
Oh,
Um,
that can be really discouraging to see when you're the social worker.
Yeah, no, it was very discouraging. And I always remind myself, and the first thing I tell any client I work with is that I I will go to bat for you.
Hmm.
I'm not here to hold your hand.
Yeah,
Um, and I will put in as much work as you do.
great.
So I try to live by that.
Hmm.
But again, sometimes we kind of get immersed in the work we do, and you know, sometimes our clients may lie to us on how much work they're putting into it.
Hmm.
And so that was ultimately the case.
Mm.
And it was disappointing because you thought you did everything you could.
Yeah.
So on top of that, with everything else creeping back in, it just came crashing down, and I was like, I need some help,
Mhm.
So um the next day, didn't handle things very well one night. And then the next day I was like, I talked to my partner and my now wife about some of the things I was going through. And I was like, I'm not really eating. I'm not really doing the things I need to. I'm having a lot of these distorted thoughts again.
Mhm.
And so I decided to take FMLA, and ended up getting some eating disorder treatment to kind of address that, um, and just really concentrate on myself.
How
As
long
somebody,
was that FMLA?
um, it was 90 days. I went ahead and took
Okay,
the full 90 days.
right.
Uh, and reason being is I think, you know, in our profession, we talk about self-care, having
Yeah, we
self-compassion.
can. We're really good at talking about it.
Yeah, no, I'm great at that. I believe in Brene Brown saying like I need to see a therapist for a therapist.
Hmm.
So I was telling my therapist, and she's like, "You think you're a special little unicorn, don't you?" And, and I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "You think none of these skills that you're teaching people actually apply to you and like yourself?" And I'm like, maybe a little bit. They work for everyone else, not for me.
Right.
um, I'm like, you know, I'm very good at talking about self-compassion, doing some DBT and CBT work,
Mhm.
behavioral activation, like great. But I'm like, it sounds like sunshines and rainbows sometimes, and I just can't
Mhm.
do that.
Yeah.
Like, so, and I think that's a part of like not wanting to admit that we sometimes need help, right? Um, so I took the full FMLA, and I just really concentrated on myself. Like what there was a lot of shame there.
Mhm.
Especially struggling with mental health problems in the past, or
Mhm.
having to get more treatment or seek out professional help.
Mhm.
And that had been a long time since that had happened. And you start to question is like, did I fail my clients?
Mhm.
Was I not, doing the best I could? Was I not being a good, like, present partner? Was I not being a good enough dad?
Mhm.
Um, so a lot of that shame component falls into that. And, I think that affected me a lot. And, feeling like a sense of like I failed.
Mhm.
Um,
Especially in this field, I mean, I've had even some clients say things about like former therapists or former social workers where other people think that we don't struggle just because we have the
yeah.
degree or we have the skills. And if anything, I think that experience can make us more empathetic, but it doesn't make us immune to having those moments where we need to take a step back, because if
Yeah.
we don't, it can I mean, just be detrimental.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, we're put on that like pedestal of like, I'm all put together and tell
Right.
me, are you there?
I'm here.
Sorry, you froze for a second. We're all put together and like we don't struggle with anything. Um,
Mhm.
and in when you're in this field, it's very much um a question of like how much self-disclosure you want to use
Right.
on your own personal struggles. The traditional way would be like no self-disclosure at all.
Mhm.
But I always say like everyone I know that's in this profession or like in my master's cohort, we're all a little messed up.
Oh yeah.
um,
Mhm.
and if I went to a therapist and didn't think they have had any issues, then I probably wouldn't want to see them. you know?
Yeah, because it does feel like how can you tell me to do these things? Like how
Right.
do you know? So I do think it's in some ways not, I don't know if beneficial is the right word, but can help clients relate to us and see like, okay, like I know that they're human and that they're struggling, and yet they're still able to do these skills or take that time for themselves.
Yeah. No, it, you know, I think a lot of us talk about meeting people where they're at,
Hmm.
right? In our practice. And are we truly meeting people where they're at if we're not able to, fully be ourselves? And,
Right.
I had a client earlier and talking through like some of their struggles. And I'm like, we can work on these skills, we can do what we need to do, but sometimes you're going to have lapses and sometimes you're
Hmm.
going to have a bad day, and then saying, I have a bad day, you have a bad day. Everybody has these bumps in the roads in life. And
Hmm.
really, what the difference maker is and where you kind of use these skills and where I need to use some of these skills is where things don't become life impeding, right?
Hmm.
Having that balance, again, easier said than done, but
Yeah, absolutely. It is very difficult because I think, I mean, my story is very similar to yours. I've been depressed since I was 12, and I only recently started going to therapy. Like in 2020, I started because of the pandemic that really really pushed me to do it. And I started therapy for PTSD, but it wasn't until like moving through all of that that my therapist was like, you have depression. And that was something I had known, but there was some kind of internal stigma and barrier within myself where I was just like, rationally, I know I'm like checking off the criteria for depression, but it was just something I was so against accepting, where I'm just like, how can I be like a functioning therapist when my specialty is adults with depression and anxiety and
Right.
PTSD and be one of those adults? But I mean, it was the best decision I ever made. And even before getting on, I had a meeting with a new therapist and it was great. It's important to take that time because I realized that I could just like function. I thought I could function like without support. Like you said, like we're
Right.
just this special little unicorn. We don't need any of these things. But when you kind of get to the place of burnout or just complete overwhelm, and for me, it starts affecting my practice. I don't like to admit that it does, but there are some times where I like have to cancel a session with a client when that is not my norm, or I'm always late on my notes. And those are some of those warning signs where I'm like, something's going on.
Yep.
I need to check
That's
in.
exactly how I was before I had to take.
Yeah.
It's like, I found myself rescheduling like a
Hmm.
few times or, making excuses, getting way behind on my notes.
Yeah.
And it was like, no, I mean, I felt like as far as my clients go, I felt like they were in good places,
Hmm.
but you know, I wasn't, and I probably wasn't putting 100% into everything.
Hmm.
Um, and again, kind of like that shame component,
Yeah.
like am I a hypocrite for like doing these things and talking about them when I can barely keep it together at the same time?
Mm-hmm. Right. I would have moments where like I'm speaking with a client, we've made so much progress, there's so much like pride with them. But there's like a moment where I have where I'm like, how are they functioning better than me? I'm like, that's like I'm their therapist. And it's just like a really wild dynamic that can happen. And you had mentioned earlier, like you saw my Instagram stories. And for the listeners that don't know, I took a hiatus from basically everything to do with the social work bubble, the podcast, the shop, the Instagram, everything, because it was becoming too much. And it was my therapist at the time who kind of said, it's okay to take a break. And even though that was something I rationally knew as a therapist, I needed someone else to give me that permission to say, shut it down. Because, like you, I mean, I was planning for a wedding, I was trying to manage this whole online business and working full time as a therapist. I don't have 3 children, but I mean, a lot to manage.
Yeah.
And at some point I had to be real with myself and say like I can't do it all, and that's okay that I couldn't, because now that I took a break for a few months, like a good chunk of time, I'm coming back and I'm feeling all the more better, more rejuvenated, and more clear on what I want this to be and look like.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think sometimes when I work with clients and then this like recently when a light bulb went off on myself, I'm like saying like, I don't, when I talk to my clients, I'm like, I don't want this to be a chore,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you tell me some of your coping skills, if you can't do that, or you're like, I feel like I have to do this because Luccas is going to get on to me,
Mm-hmm.
like, if, but if it's a chore, then it makes you really not want to do it. And you're really like starting to just wanted to avoid, and you really just stop caring. So I've definitely been in the position kind of like I am doing all these things that I actually care about. Like I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
for you, like the podcast, your store,
Yeah.
and it's just like, I have to keep up with this.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Right.
this feels like a chore, and things that you're passionate about shouldn't feel like a chore. Same with like, helping others, like
Mm-hmm.
what we do.
Yeah. And that's when, when you start to reschedule appointments or cancel. And I mean, that's why I do it, because it feels like I can't be a therapist today. Like I can't. But when that's how I'm feeling all the time, that's
Yeah.
when you gotta take a minute and reflect and be like, what's going on here? Like, what do I need to change? Because it's clearly not working. I'm not helping myself by continuing this way, and I'm not helping the other people in my life or my clients by not getting the support that I need.
Yeah. No, it's hard to be fully present
Mm-hmm.
even in the places that you care the most to
Mm-hmm.
be. I care a lot about my work, and that was hard. But what really started to hit me is like when I wasn't being present at my home with
Mm-hmm.
my family, because that's means more to work than me. Like
Right.
that's my life. That makes me happy. And when I find myself irritable with it, like with
Mm-hmm.
kids or, like feeling snappy, and it's like, and then the next day I go work with a kid struggling with behavioral,
Yeah.
and I'm not doing what I need to be doing
Mm-hmm.
at home. It's just like, yeah, that I need to take a break
Mm-hmm.
for myself, because it becomes a disservice to your clients, and then you start feeling really bad at home or
Yeah,
in your personal life.
absolutely. Really can take over a whole
It
bunch.
can.
Yeah. You had mentioned, so you went on FMLA, you used that time to really focus on yourself, like getting treatment. I took a break from like my brand and I got started back in therapy. What other things were really helpful for you during this process of healing?
Yeah, I mean, I think just I talk about like the whole health model, right?
Mhm.
and and like it seems so simple, but I
Mhm.
had no like I had things that I did every day, but they were so sporadic. Like,
Yeah.
I fulfilled everything I needed to do that like each day,
Mhm.
but I had no real routine. My
Mhm.
sleep was awful, plus the eating issues.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, just the routine was awful. And that, you know, that simple looking at, okay, I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating,
Mhm.
I'm not taking care of myself. That all affects your, mental health.
100%.
On top of like it's physically draining,
Mhm.
and then when you add on to the mental health component, um, not great,
Yeah.
So a lot of it was just going back to the basics of what are my basic human needs? Like, what are
Mhm.
my human needs that we kind of take for granted in a sense,
Yeah.
like, oh, this is just natural that we do these things,
Mhm.
but and then we make excuses when we can't fulfill something, right?
Right.
For our basic needs.
Mhm.
So like when people say, "Oh, I forgot to eat," or "Oh, I was doing this all night. I didn't sleep very well because I had to get
Right.
this done." And then we start making excuses for
Mhm.
ourselves, and we begin to forget about our basic human needs.
Mhm.
So I really did a lot of reflection and just time being, like
Yeah.
time being by myself, reflecting on what I was doing on my day to day,
Mhm.
and just like I need to sleep.
Yeah.
I need to like eat, and like my is very logical, but then there's the component of that side, where it very much like is another voice in my head.
Mhm.
Um, so you know, I realized logically that I needed to do these things,
Mhm.
but sometimes that we know that and it's like, oh, that all makes sense,
Right.
but are we actually implementing it? So
Mhm.
um you know uh routine, getting like a structure. And I am not a rigid routine person at all.
Mhm.
If you ask anybody in my life that's very close to me, um
Yeah.
I've gotten better as I've gotten older, but
Mhm.
um it I think when I say routine, I don't mean rigidity. I mean covering your basic needs and incorporating that in your everyday life,
Mhm.
not necessarily scheduling hour to the hour of what you're going
Right.
to do.
Definitely. That's been, I think, an eye opener for me, is because historically I've been very, very rigid. A lot of the times as a result of my mental health, like this perfectionism that I had, like trying to prove myself and my worth to the people around me. And so I really strived to accomplish anything and everything that I could. So I was very, very rigid with myself. And then once I moved away from my family and I was going to grad school, all of that validation that was once around me, or that sense of competitiveness I had that pushed me to do all of that, was gone. And that's when my depression really started to surface and really became apparent to me. And at first, I tried addressing it like how I used to. Like, I tried to just be really rigid with myself again and to be like, all right, let's schedule hour by hour what you need to do. And for some people, that works, but you also have to let yourself evolve and to know, like, you got to meet yourself where you're at, just like we do in
Yeah.
science,
Yeah.
right? And like, I'm not that person anymore. I'm not that person that requires that rigidity. Like, I have to be gentle with myself and flexible to know, yeah, we need to eat, we need to sleep well, but we can also have some balance. It doesn't have to be like eating and sleeping as a chore.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, I think for me, there's always been that like chip on my shoulder,
Mhm.
um, where I need that validation. And that's kind of where like my eating disorder and like body image comes up. Like,
Mhm.
you know, like if I look a certain way, if I have these accolades, or if I'm on a podcast, like,
Mhm.
it's that sense of validation that, and that I guess we matter,
Yeah.
that we're doing well in our profession or whatever we're doing in life. And I mean, I think everybody, it's, human nature to want validation.
Mhm.
Um, but at the same time, you can only get so much external validation from everything you're doing.
Mhm.
And what you really need is that internal validation and that self-compassion to say, hey, it's okay not to do these things. You're still
Mhm.
doing the best you can, and you're still, you know, doing, like, you have no evidence
Yeah.
to say that you're not, right?
Mhm. Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah. Definitely changing even those definitions, like those beliefs I have within myself of like what does success even look like? Like what does functioning look like? Like how about I stop trying to just survive and get through the day and try to be in a place of thriving and enjoying my life and
yeah.
not just moving in and out day by day. Mm. Oh, sorry, I got a pop up with the whatever. Okay. Now, what things have not been helpful during this process? Because what comes to mind for me at least is potentially people's responses, whether they're supportive or not supportive. But
Yeah.
I mean, can you touch on that and what else comes up for you there?
So what I call people, like, I think I have an idea of what responses you're talking about. I call those hallmark responses.
I love that.
Because it's awkward and people
Yeah.
want to be supportive, but at the same time, it's like, that's not helpful.
Hmm.
like, and so it reminds me of like a Hallmark card, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry for your loss. Hope you feel better soon. Like things
Right.
like of that nature.
Hmm.
Um, I think what was not helpful, at times, were kind of those responses from people, or like, I never thought you were struggling this hard, or like, why didn't you say something,
Right.
or like, why did you feel like you needed to do it on your own,
Hmm.
and i i I don't think they understand. I don't think they understood that, like, particular people, especially like if you're in survival mode all the
Yeah.
time, it's like, I don't need any help. I've been doing
Hmm.
this by myself for a long time.
Right.
So some of that sense of stubbornness, like,
Hmm.
and that sense of pride, like you were talking about, like in being someone in the profession, like I don't need this. Like
Fine.
I'm fine. It's good like this, right?
Hmm.
um and it it was hard to open up and fully be present and explain, like, what's not helpful or what's not helpful to say, especially
Hmm.
when I was really struggling around food, and particular meals and particular things that were frustrating for me.
Hmm.
And I felt at home like there was some, like, frustration with, like, towards me, because sometimes people feel like they're having to walk on eggshells on, like,
Hmm.
what to say or what not to say. And again, it's like, people's words are well meaning, especially
Right.
people close to you, but then it's like, that I don't say that. And then, like, oh, what should I say? And then it turns into a whole, like,
Yes.
a whole thing. um but yeah, I think that was really the main things of,
Hmm.
like, what's not helpful. And like I said, it's awkward when you're struggling,
Hmm.
and um you know and people in your inner circle, but not immediate, like, feel like, oh, you're doing all these wonderful things. I don't get, like,
Hmm.
why this happened.
Yeah. Absolutely. Just kind of not getting it, not really
Yeah.
understanding. And that's a space where I've had to learn to be really mindful of my own communication, setting boundaries with people, because that it can be really easy in those moments to just be like, whatever, like, or to not even share. Because as someone that, struggle with perfectionism, to admit that I'm struggling is just a wild concept.
Yeah.
And that's been a big support, really, is, I mean, if it's a safe person, if they have a response, that's fine, or that is a teachable moment, then it can be really healing, because I think
Yeah.
it's really creating that sense of community, because it can feel in many ways very isolating, especially in this profession, when a lot of people might feel weird saying, yeah, I'm a therapist and I'm a social worker and I'm super depressed or I'm really
And I'm
struggling.
all sorts of messed
Yeah.
up.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, it's that shame component, feeling like you're a failure,
Yeah.
um, especially when you try so hard
Hmm.
to be the best.
Definitely. Yeah. But even I don't I've been so iffy about disclosure with my clients, and with some of them I haven't disclosed obviously like details. I don't really talk about depression because as a therapist it's a weird situation sometimes.
Yeah.
But I've let some of them know, like, I see a therapist, to try to take away from that stigma, and they kind of ask like, oh, why, and all of that. But it's helpful conversations, because I think even addressing it through, whether that's self-disclosure, whether that's like supervision or group supervision, we help destigmatize it. And that's how we really start to learn, yeah, other people are obviously all therapists. Like, I mean, we're kind of trained not to be judgmental about other people.
Right.
So it's kind of one of the safer spaces to even get that support and see, oh, wow, these other people also have their own stories and their own struggles. And it's a lot less isolating than we think it is.
Yeah. No, totally. You know, I don't think I don't like to say I struggle with self-disclosure. I struggle with some people that are more traditional
Mm-hmm.
minded in the field,
Yes.
um because again, I am very aware that I'm not going to tell anything to a client
Yes.
by making this therapy session me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if I find that it can be useful, um and again, the main reason I use it is to take some of that stigma off.
Mm-hmm.
I think the best way to develop rapport with someone is to let them know you're human,
Mm-hmm.
and that you struggle,
Yeah.
just like they do. Not the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
I not invalidating. Like, I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not in your shoes, but I struggle,
Mm-hmm.
just as much as anyone else.
Yeah.
And so using my experience in struggling with my own mental health, I think that can be useful.
Mm-hmm.
um, I think you especially see that in people of color,
Yeah.
to help, are people of color are people that have had bad experiences with seeking treatment,
Mm-hmm.
um, because it's like, oh, like they it's not about them fixing me, and I can actually begin to trust them
Mm-hmm.
because they are human. Like, this isn't, again, taking away from the stigma.
Right. Absolutely. It definitely builds that rapport and
Yeah,
that trust that's there. Yeah. Needed.
it is.
Mhm.
There, I had a good talk that from a man named Rashawn Miller.
Mhm.
Rashawn Miller. Have you seen some of
Yes, that sounds so familiar.
it? He he's a public speaker and a therapist. I think, let me see. Um, and his company is Good Stress Company, and then he also has um, like a mental health organization for underserved communities called eustress. Um,
Okay. Hmm.
um, or eustressing. um, and he talks about how I believe he had bipolar disorder and had a mental break
Hmm.
and ended up getting like detained and sent to an inpatient unit
Mm.
and his experience with that. So he's very open with his clients about that, which I really appreciate. And um, it takes off that stigma.
Absolutely. And that's needed because all of my clients so far come in with internalized stigma, and that affects their own treatment. So if we as the social worker therapist can be the one to also dismantle it within ourselves and with our clients, we're only bringing people up and allowing the
Yeah,
space to
yeah,
be safer.
yeah, totally.
Let's talk about for other social workers, other therapists that also are dealing with, mental health concerns, whether at whatever stage. For myself, it took me a really long time until I was actively in grad school. The pandemic was happening, and all these things had to come together before I considered getting treatment. What do you think would be helpful for them to hear based on your experience in terms of what's helpful, what's supportive?
Yeah, what's helpful? Uh, I think it's helpful to hear that, just because, you know, we're in this profession doesn't mean we shouldn't look at ourselves from time to time.
Mhm.
Um, and, you know, it's totally ingrained, like, don't do this to get burned out. And we're like, I know, that's, but it's important to say, like, incorporate that self-care and not just
Mhm.
talk about it or say no to things,
Yeah.
know your limitations, and just know that you're supported. We have a big community. Like, for instance, when I saw your Instagram story,
Mhm.
you talked about what you were going through. I sent you a message and I was like,
Yes.
you're supported. Let's not forget that. You
Mhm.
know, we have a supportive community,
Mhm.
and I think it's helpful to get reminders like that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Way more supportive than our brain ever makes us believe.
Yeah,
We think that we're so isolated and that, oh, I'm the only one going through this. But even within the small practice I work at, there's other people that have depression or anxiety or ADHD, and therapists are humans, and that
yeah,
comes with all the human problems that are there.
yeah. I'm a strong believer that everyone needs therapy. So-
Yes, absolutely.
what about you? What would you say?
I would say, yeah, I think something I needed to hear was struggling and needing help doesn't make you a bad social worker or a bad therapist. It
Yeah,
doesn't mean that you're not passionate about the field. It doesn't mean it takes away from any of your skill or any of your ability. It just means that you're human and you're allowed to be human. I think for me, we think that we're just supposed to be like superheroes, honestly, and just immune to everything. But it's not possible. And we're allowed
yeah,
to be real with ourselves.
yeah. No, I mean, I think I needed to do that for myself. Like, I'm not a failure for
Mhm.
having to get treatment again.
Yeah.
And hearing that from people, hearing that from my supervisor who I had to talk to and take leave, and tell her I was taking leave, like, she's like, no, you did not do anything wrong. You did not fail your clients by having to do this. Like, and then, you know, hearing that I'm not being a bad dad, but that
Mhm.
I'm just needing to take time to get help from someone else.
Yeah.
Some of
Absolutely.
that like cognitive restructuring.
That's right. Honestly, though, like use those tools on yourself. There have been
Totally.
countless times, and like we have the skills, we can
Yeah.
use them in our own life.
Yeah.
Good. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Luccas, for coming on the podcast again.
Yeah.
You're always a pleasure to have. You have great insight, and I just think your own story and the things that you experience allows you to be a really awesome clinician and social worker.
Thanks.
So thank you for
I think
coming
you're
on.
awesome too.
Oh, thank you. See, look at the support that's here.
See, support, validation, we're all about it here.
Amazing. All right. Well, if people want to continue to follow your story and all of that, where can they find you?
Yeah, so it's still Dad Boots on
Love
Instagram.
it.
Um, I did recently think I'm like I should probably make one that's just about like social work and mental health. So that's up and coming. It will just be
Exciting.
Dad Boots 2.
Love it.
Like the number.
Yeah.
So feel free to follow that one already.
Right.
I'm working on it to kind of talk about some advocacy work, talk about masculinity, some of my passions, eating disorders among men, and talk about some of the social work podcasts that are out there, including yours.
Amazing. Well, that's
Yeah.
awesome. All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for listening to today's episode. Please feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments, share, like, do whatever you want to do, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.